Everyone knows Jack Ma as the billionaire who built Alibaba, but almost nobody knows he was rejected from 30 different jobs, failed almost every important exam, and was once told he was not smart enough to succeed. This is the story of how the man nobody wanted became one of the most powerful businessmen in the world. Jack Ma was not born into money, power, or privilege. He was born in 1964 in Hangzhou, a quiet city in China, to two ordinary parents who worked as traditional storytellers. They were not rich, they were not connected. What they had was a small home, a few books, and a lot of hope. But even with hope, Jack's childhood was not easy. From the moment he stepped into school, Jack struggled. His teachers said he was slow. His classmates laughed when he couldn't solve simple math problems. While other kids finished their work quickly, Jack was still staring at the page, confused. He failed math again and again. He failed tests again and again, and every single failure chipped away at his confidence. But Jack had one strange obsession that would quietly change his life forever: English. In the 1970s, tourists started visiting Hangzhou. Jack would ride his old bicycle to a nearby hotel every morning before school. He wasn't trying to sell anything. He wasn't looking for money. He was just hoping to talk. He would approach foreign tourists and say in broken English, "Hello, can we be friends?" Most of them were surprised. Some said no, but some smiled and said yes. Every morning for 9 years, Jack would meet tourists and talk to them in English. They corrected his grammar. They taught him new words. They told him stories about the world outside China. And slowly, Jack's mind began to grow bigger than the small streets he lived on. One of those tourists gave him a nickname, Jack. His real name was Ma Yun, but Jack was easier for foreigners to say, and Jack loved it. It made him feel like he belonged to a bigger world, but school was still a nightmare. Jack failed the university entrance exam twice. Imagine how painful that was. Everyone around him was moving forward, he was stuck. The third time he took the exam, he barely passed. He was accepted into a small teachers' college. It was not a famous university, it was not impressive. But Jack didn't care. To him, it felt like a miracle. He studied English and graduated in 1988. And then reality hit him hard. He went out to find a job, and the world rejected him. He applied to more than 30 different jobs: hotel clerk, police officer, office assistant, restaurant worker. Every single one said no. One famous story still breaks people's hearts. KFC opened a store in his city. 24 people applied, 23 were hired. Jack Ma was the only one rejected. He later laughed about it, but inside it hurt deeply. Why am I always the one nobody wants? He used to think. Finally, he found a job as an English teacher. He earned about $12 a month. Yes, a month. But Jack loved teaching. He was funny. He told stories. He made learning exciting. Students didn't just learn English, they felt inspired. And while teaching, Jack had another dream growing quietly inside him. He wanted to change China. In 1995, Jack traveled to the United States for the first time. That trip changed everything. A friend showed him something called the internet. Jack typed the word buyer into a search engine. Nothing about China came up. He tried China, almost nothing. He stared at the screen and whispered, "This is a chance." That same day, he decided to start a company. He called it China Pages. He returned to China and told people, "The internet is the future." Most of them laughed. They said, "What is internet? Who will use it? This is a stupid idea." His first company failed, but Jack did not quit. In 1999, he gathered 18 friends in his small apartment. No fancy office, no big money, just belief. He stood in front of them and said, "We are going to build a company that helps small businesses sell to the world." That company was Alibaba. In the beginning, nobody trusted them. Investors said no. Banks said no. People said, "You are crazy." Jack kept going. Sometimes the company had only enough money to survive for a few months. Sometimes employees didn't get paid on time. Sometimes it felt like everything would collapse. But Jack never stopped believing. He told his team, "Today is hard. Tomorrow will be worse. But the day after tomorrow will be sunshine." Slowly, Alibaba began to grow. Small Chinese sellers started using it. Then more came. Then the world noticed. Years later, Alibaba became one of the biggest companies on earth. Jack Ma, the boy who failed exams, the man who was rejected from every job, became a billionaire. But his story was far from over. The story of Jack Ma isn't just about money or business, it's a powerful lesson in resilience. It shows that where you start doesn't have to determine where you finish. It reminds us that failure is not the end, but a stepping stone. So, if you've ever felt rejected, if you've ever been told you're not good enough, remember Jack Ma's story. Remember that the world's rejections can be the fuel for your greatest successes. Jack Ma never wanted to be the richest man in China. What he wanted was something far more dangerous. He wanted to change the system. By the early 2000s, Alibaba was growing fast, but it was also bleeding money. Servers were expensive. Marketing was expensive. Employees needed salaries. Jack would often wake up at night in a cold sweat, terrified that tomorrow would be the day everything collapsed. In China back then, most big companies were either controlled by the government or by powerful, well-connected elites. Jack had none of that. Alibaba was just a small group of dreamers with laptops and a whole lot of faith. And then, something terrifying happened. A giant entered the room. Its name was eBay. eBay didn't just walk into China. It stormed in with billions of dollars. They rented massive, gleaming offices. They hired hundreds of workers and plastered advertisements on every bus and billboard. To almost everyone, it looked like a foregone conclusion. The tiny, scrappy Alibaba was about to be crushed by a global behemoth. But Jack Ma wasn't just anyone. He gathered his team, looked them in the eyes, and said, "If eBay is a tiger, then we must be a pack of wolves. We don't fight with brute strength. We fight with speed and cunning." And so, Alibaba launched a new platform called Taobao. And they did something that seemed completely insane at the time. They made it free. While eBay was charging sellers a fee for every listing, Taobao charged nothing. At first, the executives at eBay just laughed. "Free won't last," they said. It's not a sustainable business model, but they misunderstood China. Small businesses, entrepreneurs, and dreamers from all across the country rushed to Taobao, millions of them. They finally had a place to sell their goods without paying hefty fees. Within just a few years, eBay was defeated. They packed their bags and left China. Jack Ma had beaten a global giant with little more than creativity, courage, and a deep understanding of his own people. With eBay gone, money started pouring in. Investors, both local and foreign, started knocking on the door. And with investors came power struggles. Some people wanted Jack to step aside. They thought he was too emotional, too wild, too unpredictable to run a major company. Jack later reflected on this, saying, "When you are poor, everyone ignores you. When you become rich, everyone wants to control you." In 2005, this struggle reached a critical point. Yahoo invested $1 billion in Alibaba. On the surface, it was a massive victory, a validation of everything they had built, but it was also a trap. In exchange for the money, Yahoo took a huge piece of his company. Suddenly, Jack had to answer to foreign bosses, people who sat in boardrooms in California, who didn't understand the nuances of the Chinese market, and who, above all, only cared about the quarterly profit report. The pressure inside Alibaba became unbearable. To streamline the company and please the new investors, Jack had to make brutal decisions. He had to fire close friends, people who had been with him from the very beginning. He had to transform from a dreamer into a hardened leader. One night, sitting alone in his office, he stared out at the glittering city lights of Hangzhou and whispered to himself, "Is this still my company?" He was winning the war in the marketplace, but it felt like he was losing his soul. Then came the hardest blow of all. A new government regulation threatened Alibaba's most important and valuable asset, Alipay, to comply with the law and protect the payment platform from being shut down. Jack made a controversial move. He spun Alipay out of Alibaba and into a new, separate company under his personal control. The reaction from Yahoo and his other foreign investors was explosive. They were furious. They accused him of betrayal, of stealing the company's crown jewel. They threatened to sue him into oblivion. Jack's reputation was on the line. The international media painted him as dishonest. Some even called him a thief. But Jack held his ground, believing he was making the only choice that could save his company from being destroyed by complex regulations. For months he lived under a cloud of constant stress and fear. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a deal was struck. Alibaba survived. And then, something truly unbelievable happened. In 2014, Alibaba went public on the New York Stock Exchange. It wasn't just any IPO, it was the biggest public offering in history. Jack Ma, the man who was once rejected for a job at KFC, stood on a stage in New York, surrounded by flashing cameras, and rang the opening bell. The entire world applauded. He was now one of the richest and most powerful men on earth. But deep inside, Jack felt something strange, an emptiness. "When you reach the top of the mountain," he said later, "you realize the mountain never ends. There's always another one to climb." The applause felt hollow. He started to step back from the day-to-day operations of Alibaba. He wanted to return to his first love, teaching. He wanted to use his platform to inspire a new generation of entrepreneurs. He had built an empire, changed a nation, and defeated giants. He had faced betrayal, pressure, and public humiliation. He had won. But in the world of power, politics, and money, the game is never truly over. Jack Ma had weathered many storms, but an even bigger one was gathering on the horizon. And this time, the forces aligned against him would be more powerful than he could ever imagine. The battle for Alibaba was over, but the battle for Jack Ma's legacy was just beginning. Jack Ma thought the hardest part of his life was over. He was wrong. By 2019, he wasn't just a businessman. He was a symbol, a legend, a living testament that a poor teacher from China could conquer the world's biggest stage. When he announced he was stepping down as chairman of Alibaba, people openly wept. Employees hugged him. The media crowned him China's Steve Jobs. Jack smiled for the cameras, but inside, a deep exhaustion had set in. He craved freedom. He wanted to return to his first love, teaching. He wanted to focus on education, not just on making money. As he famously said, "I don't want to die behind a desk," but the world wasn't ready to let him go. In October 2020, Jack gave a speech in Shanghai that would change everything. Standing on that stage, as confident and fearless as ever, he took aim at China's financial system. He bluntly said the banks were acting like pawn shops, and that the entire system was stifling innovation. The audience laughed and applauded, but some very powerful people were not amused. Within days, the empire began to crack. Alibaba's stock plummeted. The highly anticipated IPO of his other company, Ant Group, was abruptly cancelled just days before its launch. Government regulators launched sweeping investigations. And then, Jack Ma vanished. He disappeared completely from public view. No more interviews, no events, no social media posts. Weeks turned into months. The world buzzed with rumors. Was he under arrest? Was he in hiding? Was he even alive? The man who once filled stadiums with his voice was now utterly silent. Friends said he was heartbroken, not because of the money he lost, but because he had lost his voice. He had always been a champion for the free exchange of ideas, and now he had discovered his own limits. Years later, Jack Ma was spotted again, but not in a boardroom or on a grand stage. He was quietly teaching abroad, in a simple classroom, far from the spotlight. Some said he fell from grace. Others claimed he was punished for his audacity, but those who knew him best offered a different perspective. They said he had finally found his peace. Because Jack Ma was never truly built for power. He was built for stories, for teaching, for dreaming. He once said, if you don't give up, you still have a chance. Giving up is the greatest failure. That sentence is his true legacy. From a boy who failed his exams, to a man who shook the world, to a teacher once again, Jack Ma didn't lose, he just changed his battlefield. Thanks for watching.